But Mr. Bingaman also he was a funeral director, and right next to his house was this little building which they had funerals in, or viewings, I should say. Now, before 1912, about half the people had viewings in their own home, and they would have this viewing box, which was quite deep. It was metal, and the bottom would be ice, and even they had ice up around the sides because they didn't embalm the bodies. The bodies would be laid in this refrigerator-like thing, and a lot of people didn't want to be bothered with all of the people tramping into their homes, so they would rent Mr. Bingaman's little building, and he would have the iced coffin, we'll call it, in there. But right about where that tree is was another garage about that size, which was an ice house. He would go over to the Middle Creek and during the winter time and cut out huge blocks of ice and put the ice in this ice house and cover it with sawdust, and then as his requirements were to, exhibit bodies, he'd go and get some ice and chop it up and crush it and put it in the coffin, and then of course after the funeral throw it away. And well, when he sold the property to Lloyd Marks from McClure, we called him Pete Marks. Pete Marks was not interested at all in the funeral parlor, so he removed the paraphernalia from that, sold it to another gentleman by the name of Bingaman, who had one later on downtown, and he built a little shoe repair shop. And then the ice house he kept. And about then, around 1915, something like that, people were affluent enough to buy ice boxes, they were called. We call them refrigerators, but they were really nothing but an insulated wooden chest, and there was a compartment to put ice in, which would keep the inside relatively cold. So Pete would go around to town, and you put a placard in your window, and it was just a plain white cardboard thing that said ice, and when you had that in your window, he was invited to come in your home, whether you were there or not, and put a piece of ice in your refrigerator and leave a little bill. And so he did that. But besides delivering ice, when we wanted to make homemade ice cream, we could go and buy some ice, and we would usually put it in a burlap bag and take the flat side of an axe, a two-faced axe, and just smash this thing until it was fine, and then put it into the freezer and make homemade ice cream. I'll tell you one little anecdote about making homemade ice cream. Today, almost all ice cream homemade has electric or some other mode of power rather than the handle. Well, I won't mention any names, but I could, but I won't. A son who is a graduate of Penn State with a master's degree, his father was a very prominent Beavertown businessman. They were making ice cream, and all of a sudden the electric motor gave out on it just quit. And so he removed the attachment from the freezer, went out to the trunk of his car, and got a handle. And the handle had the same fitting as the electric motor had, and he continued to turn it by hand. And his son said, "Hey, what'll they think of next?" Not realizing that that's the only way we could do it many years ago. Well, Pete Marks was a great institution, and his ice, it was just great. I remember when we first got our ice box and were able to keep Beavertown made soft drinks in. There was a bottling plant here. I thought I was living in heaven, because I had my own soft drink right in my own home, and it was just an incredible thing. But those are just memories of the past. I think now what we're going to do is shift our gears. Oh, by the way, of course, the Lutheran Church also owned this land. It was just a vacant lot until 1948, when a group of rose growers, the Snyder County Rose Growers Association, and most of them were from Beavertown, principally Art Felker who was the superintendent of schools, Rudy Coleman, who had an insurance agency, Guy Nair, who owned the Super Service Garage, Al Camp, who had a nursery of his own. Those were the moving forces to get this rose garden started. And after it was started, they decided to rename it to the Veterans Memorial Rose Garden. And now there is a Veterans Memorial Association of people from all three churches who maintain this particular spot. And it's one of the beauty spots of our little town. And we just added a walk of honor this year. About a year or two ago, we put in our little wall there, which has the names of all veterans carved in it. It's chiseled in stone, literally. And so that's we converted that ugly lot into a beauty spot, and we hope to add to it, and future generations will probably add other things there. But we hold our Memorial Day services here every year, and it's a wonderful spot because the Memorial Day is intended to remember and memorialize the deceased, and especially deceased veterans. And we've had 6 in a row now of beautiful weather days. But in the event that on Memorial Day it shouldn't be nice, we'll hold it inside this particular church here. But now let's just go on down the street. Mr. Moses Spate, the second most prominent man of Beavertown, who I'll reiterate, he built the Oregon House Hotel, he built this church schoolhouse, he built this church, he built that church, he built the Grease's Red Bridge, which is outside of Beavertown. He built another house down at the foot of Chestnut Street and other things. But he also put in the Selinsgrove and the Sunbury to Lewistown Railroad. He was the Adams Express agent. He was a sheriff of Snyder County. He was a postmaster. He was a businessman. He had an iron foundry where he built thrashing machines and corn shellers and all sorts of things. He was a very, very prominent man. That was my great uncle, so hi, Uncle Moses. You're a good man. And the most prominent man that Beavertown ever produced is Nur Middlesworth, the Honorable Nur Middlesworth. Where that flag is and that flat stone, that is the grave of the Honorable Nur Middlesworth, who in 1812, the second Revolutionary War, we call it, also historians do, he formed a company of men on 2 separate occasions and was in active combat against the British in the War of 1812. And he came back and he was elected 13 times Speaker of the House of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He was in the House of Representatives of the 33rd Congress of the United States. And Clay and Webster were also in that particular Congress. And if you're familiar with Clay, Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, they were very prominent. They're prominent in history. But they regarded, and this is written someplace, it's documented, they both regarded Nur Middlesworth as the most distinguished man in the 33rd Congress. He was involved with my Kern relatives in developing the Beaver Furnace at Paxtonville, which was, they'd take iron ore out of the Shade Mountain and take it down there and smelt it into pig iron. He was involved, he owned 13 businesses and about 6 or 7 farms. And the guy who was running the Beaver Furnace, the management there, mismanaged it terribly, and to cover up, he took money out of the business and ended up putting the business in deep, deep debt. And while my Kern relatives had enough money to not worry about it, Moses had all of his businesses and his farms pledged as security, and he lost it all. And he spent the rest of his life working very hard at everything he could do to pay off the remaining debt. And when he died, he no longer was indebted to anyone, but he himself was living a terribly, a pretty rough life. But he was such a man of distinction and such a man of honesty that because others did him wrong, he still took the responsibility and saw that every penny of debt, including interest, was paid to all of the debtors. And that's why I salute Nur Middlesworth. But now let's just move on. This particular structure here is the only existing ice house in Beavertown. It is a fully functioning ice house. There's a concrete base with a sloped concrete floor with a drain pipe, and the ice saw that you saw in the ice, it's got a handle on one end and then just a straight saw is in there. The ice thongs, the ice picks, the ice carriers, everything, all the equipment is there. I don't have any ice in, but when we bought the house in 1945, it was full of ice and sawdust, and it lasted us for a whole year of making homemade ice cream. That's all we needed it for, because by that time we had an electric refrigerator. But it is the only functioning ice house in the borough of Beavertown, and perhaps beyond Beavertown as far as I know. Karen's Cut and Curl is right down here on the corner. Most of you are familiar with that, I presume. Well, originally that was just a vacant lot. I have a picture of myself standing there in 1938. Nothing but vacant lots and fields all the way out through. But about 1940, Russell Bemper put a planing mill there. And the planing mill was an important industry because people would bring in their wood to rough, and he would cut it and then plane it, smooth it out, and also store it in his dryer, and then it became wood fit to use for construction purposes. But there were an awful lot of shavings came out of the process, and these were used for litter for rabbit pens and chicken houses. And during World War II, and even before obviously, virtually every property in Beavertown had either a chicken house or a pig pen or a barn that kept animals in it. My house had a barn, a straw shed, a pig pen, a chicken house, a smokehouse besides the ice house, and two other utility buildings. And that whole lot was covered, and Rodney can attest to this, the whole lot was covered with buildings except for the inner core, which was a grape vineyard and a fruit orchard. But this house, right here next to it, was the home of Henry Weaver, and all of the land, except for that was also part of his house. The only house that was here then was that house and that house. And that was a fruit house to store fruit in, and the rest of the land was used for peach trees, apricot trees, cherry trees, and other fruit trees. And he had a business here of peddling the fruit when it was in season, but year-round he had an ice cream shop. He made homemade ice cream. Again, he could go up to Mr. Bingaman and get all the ice he needed, or from his neighbors, the Kerns, who lived there, he could get ice to make his homemade ice cream. It was a favorite spot on weekends for people to come and sit in the parlor and eat homemade ice cream. And of course, what can I say? It was just a nice thing to do. And we don't have any real nice ice cream parlors anymore, but we had several. We had Mr. Bub had one, and there was up here on the square where the bank is now, that was the best soda fountain I've ever been to in my life. Maybe prejudiced, but it had everything. It had the marble bar and all of the sterling silver implements, and you could get anything you wanted. Our favorite drink was called the Pink Parachute, where you had these squirters, about 12 squirters. You put some chocolate, some vanilla, some cherry, some lime. You just go down the line and fill the glass about that much with 12 different ingredients, and then take carbonated water and stir it up. And it looked muddy, but that was called the Pink Parachute, and that was our favorite drink. Well,